Hey, John, can you hear me? Roy, are you there?
Yes, I am, Rick.
Trying to get John going here, but John's.
Yes.
I see that his mic is turned off, and I don't know why.
Well, things new sometimes can be more challenging, you know.
How you doing, man?
Oh, now that I'm getting back healthy, I'm doing better. I've actually got one I've got to get going to you here, but
Okay,
still
good.
I've got to catch up.
There's John.
Go ahead.
How you guys doing? All right.
Okay, you got it, John.
Okay, so can you see my screen?
Not yet, no.
Because I have, how do I,
On the top of your bar, it should say show screen. Well, here, let me.
I think I got it. No, that's camera.
Hey, there you are.
All right, I'm gonna need you to see the screen though. Show my screen.
There it is.
Okay, can you see me or see the screen or both?
I can see both.
Yep.
Okay. All right, let's see. Okay, now what do you see?
Just your presentation a little bigger, easy to see.
Okay,
Yep.
is that better?
Yep.
Works for
I
me.
can still see you. I can still see you though, so that doesn't make it great.
I know, I can't help it. There might get some cracks in your computer there. I'll turn the lights out. Maybe that'll help a little bit.
All right, you guys have fun.
Okay, cool. Thanks. All right, so, whoa, what did I do? Okay, there we go. All right, you can see this, the PowerPoint there, the screen?
I can.
Okay. All right, so sorry for the delay. Sorry, we took a little computer issue there. But basically what we're going to talk about is, as I mentioned in the email, one of the hardest things that I found when I was starting to learn how to do EMGs was to recognize what abnormal potentials look like and how to judge that, because it's difficult to practice on something abnormal unless you actually see it. So, so that's why I collected a bunch of waveforms on actual patients. So I'm going to go over some of the distinguishing factors of the abnormal potentials and how you can recognize them and how to differentiate them between normal potentials versus abnormal potentials. So those are the objectives that you can see there. So why is my, there we go. Okay. All right. So what's going on this waveform here? So I'm going to play a waveform. So we have the hints. It's a gentle isometric contraction. The gain is at 200 microvolts per division, sweep of 10, and this is using a monopolar needle. So I'm going to play the video clip. Hopefully there's no more technical glitches in this plays. So let's see what you think. Did you hear that okay?
Yep.
All right. So what do you think that was?
Fibs?
No, not quite. Fibs would be at rest. So this is with movement. So this is with gentle isometric movement, and it's a gain of 200 microvolts per division. So it's pretty sizable, gain. This was a normal motor unit. This was a normal motor unit that had an amplitude of 600 microvolts, a duration of 7 milliseconds, and it had 3 phases. So I'll play it again and stop it in between. Let's see if I can stop it while it's on there. Nope. There we go. Okay, so there's the potential. So when you have the potential, remember the amplitude was from the lowest point on the wave, which is the positive peak, up to the highest point of the wave. Do you see my mouse cursor moving up and down?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the amplitude. So this is 600 microvolts. So that would be a pretty big sized fib. So that,
Yeah. I was looking at your other mark. Sorry about that. I wasn't.
no problem.
You're
It would be a,
catching me kind of late here, so my energy level is a little bit low now. So
okay, no problem, no problem.
yeah.
So this would be a pretty big sized fib. The duration is, counting from where the waveform begins,
Right.
right over here, to where the waveform goes back to baseline, which would be around here.
Correct.
So with a sweep of 10 milliseconds, this is about a little bit less than one full box going across. So that would be estimated about 7 milliseconds.
Okay.
And the phases are 3 phases, because phases is how many times the waveform crosses the baseline. So this
Right.
would be going up from here, and it goes back down, but it doesn't cross. It goes
Correct.
back up again, and then comes back down. There it crosses. There's 1. There it crosses again, going 2, and then plus 1 is 3. So that would
Correct.
be 3 phases. So the way we can also differentiate between this and a fib were 2 ways. One was because the clue was this was a gentle isometric contraction. So fibs and
Correct.
positive sharp waves, you can only
Right.
really see those when the person's at rest. If the
Correct.
person's contracting, you can't really see them. So I'll play I'll play the rest of it one more time, and you can see that it's going at a regular type of rate. It's continuous at about the same rate. It may speed up a little tiny bit or slow down, but it's generally about the same rate. So that's another way to differentiate between the fibs and the motor units, is that this is kind of a regular type of rate. And I do have some examples of some fibs in a second.
Okay.
So again, this was the parameters for a normal motor unit. So a normal motor unit, the amplitude, as we mentioned, is measured from the peak to the peak, from the positive peak to the negative peak. There's
Correct.
a wide range of normal, meaning anywhere from 300 up to about, and this is where the references may vary a little bit, about 7,000 to 8,000 microvolts. So it's a pretty big range. The reason for the range is because it depends greatly on the strength of the contraction. So if the person's trying to do a very minimal contraction, a very slight contraction, we should generally see a smaller type of motor unit. While versus if the person is doing a maximal full effort contraction, the motor units that we see are larger because they're activating the larger motor nerves that activate the larger motor muscle fibers. So the amplitude will vary depending on how strong the contraction is. The duration is, again, from when the waveform initially moves off the baseline to its return. And normally it's about 7 to 12 milliseconds. And again, the phases is the number of times the baseline, the waveform crosses the baseline plus 1. And the normal is should be less than 5 for each individual motor unit. And then here's just a picture of it, and you can see the picture of it here, how again, the amplitude is measured from the peak to the peak. The duration is measured from the onset to the return to the baseline. And the phase is how many times the waveform crosses the baseline plus 1. So any general questions on like what normal motor unit parameters are? Kind of a little bit of a review. Any general questions on that so far?
Nope, good so far.
Okay, all right. So now let's look at, again, these are motor units. So let's look at, again, this is a gentle isometric contraction. We have a gain of 200 microvolts per division, a sweep of 10 milliseconds per division, and again, we're using a monopolar needle. What type of needles do you use typically when you do you use a monopolar or a concentric?
Oh, monopolar.
Monopolar, right. Do you know what the difference is? Why I keep mentioning and stressing monopolar? This is a little bit more advanced, but do you know what the difference between the monopolar versus the concentric needles as far as needle types?
No, John, I don't.
All right. Well, it's first and foremost the concentrics hurt a lot more. They're a thicker gauge, so they hurt a little bit more than the monopolar ones. And the monopolar gives you a better gives you a larger amplitude, so it looks bigger, but it can tend to overestimate the number of polyphasic waveforms. So that's why it's important that when we do reports, we put down what type of needle we're using, because it can influence the amplitude or how many phases we think we're seeing. So that's why I keep mentioning if it's a monopolar needle.
Good
So
to know.
let's look at this mode unit and let's see what we see here. So what do you think you see on this trace? That's good to stop it there. What do you see on this particular trace? How many different mode units do you see?
Well, I mean, we could be in 2.
Right. It could be that other one. This one here, I would probably not call that. I mean, we're close, but I
Right.
would probably not call that a motor unit because, again, if you look at it's very small. It's less than like half a box, so it's only maybe about 100 microvolts.
Okay.
So it's a little small, and so we're probably this is probably a motor unit, but we're far away. We're too far away to really see it. So
Correct.
we only got one motor unit, which this is kind of like the ideal of what you try to want to see when you're looking at motor units. So what
Correct.
would be the amplitude of this motor unit? Would this be a normal amplitude, abnormal, again, minimal contraction? What do you think how would you describe the amplitude?
Well, I mean, we're sitting, I would say normal, still about 300.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it would be at the very bottom of the level, but yeah, I still would
Right.
say it would be normal as far
Yeah,
as
so
amplitude.
exactly right. This will be a normal amplitude motor unit, like 300, 400 microvolts in size. The duration, what would you take a guess at stab what the duration would be?
Let's see here. We're going down. 500, 600.
Five
No,
or
it would be
six. Yeah,
5 or 6. Yeah.
5 or 6 milliseconds.
Yeah,
Uh,
5 or 6. Yeah.
5 or 6 milliseconds, about half a box.
Yeah.
And how many phases?
1, 2. Yeah. Let's see. We got 4 anyway. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess, or is it back to baseline would be 5.
Well, not quite 5, because
Go on.
here's where the
Right.
waveform starts, right there, right where the mouse thing is there. So we
Right.
go down,
1,
and now we come up and we cross. So we came up
cross.
and we crossed the baseline, so that's 1. It goes up to the top,
Okay.
then it comes back down, and then here it crossed the baseline again, so that's 2, and then it got back to baseline.
Okay.
So that's 2 crossings plus 1 would be 3. So this will be 3 phases.
Okay.
So we're only counting the phases in each individual motor unit. Again, this one there's a separate motor unit or close to it,
Correct.
so that doesn't count. So this would be 3 phases. So this would also be the normal number of phases. So this is a textbook normal, small but normal, and again normal for the level of contraction. That's important to distinguish, because if a person does a very minimal contraction and you get a large waveform, that's abnormal, because you should recruit the smaller muscle fibers first. Remember the size principle: the smaller happens first, so you see the smaller motor unit. So this is This will be a normal motor unit for that level of contraction. So you see how we got all the amplitude and the phases, and see how we got all that stuff?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's look at this. So now here's another situation. So now this is the person is at rest. So the person's at rest. The gain is 100 microvolts, and the sweep is 10 milliseconds. So that's the parameters for this. And again, and the person is at rest. So let's take a look at the tracing, and let's pump the volume up a little bit. Oh, and let's see what we see here. Okay. So what do you think was going on at that point?
I don't know. Look like, is this insertional activity?
Exactly. Very good. Yes, this is insertion activity.
Yeah.
Each one of those sharp discharges or sharp pops was the needle moving into a different location. So this was insertion activity. And would you classify this as normal or abnormal insertion activity?
Well, I'll say, I would say it was normal.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah.
This is normal insertion activity. So this is, again, insertion activity is when you move the needle, you're physically touching different muscle fibers with the needle. So when you touch the muscle fiber, you trigger it. You're giving a tactile stimulation to that muscle fiber, so it gives a little brief discharge. And that little brief discharge is normal. So this is perfectly normal insertion activity. So this is just the same clip. So again, normal insertional activity, to review, was a brief depolarization of muscle fibers when you physically touch the needle, touch a muscle fiber with the needle. It's normal to last about 50 milliseconds. So as soon as you stop moving the needle, it should stop a little bit after the needle stops moving. What you have to differentiate is you have to hear a sharp pop of the needle touching different muscle fibers. So if you don't hear that discharge, that means that you didn't get to another layer of muscle fiber. Remember, as you go in different depths of the muscle or different quadrants of the muscle when you're moving it around, if you didn't hear that sharp discharge, that sharp pop, that means that you're not accessing a different bunch of muscle fibers. So you have to hear that pop when you move the needle, because if you don't, then that could be what's called decreased insertional activity. That means when you're in the muscle, and you know you're in muscle because you feel a little resistance in the tissue, but you're not getting any discharge of any electrical fibers. So that would be decreased insertional activity. And that happens only in cases of really severe chronic denervation. But you want to hear that sharp pop, because that tells you that you're in the muscle and that you're able to physically touch each different muscle fiber. So let's take a look at the next one, and let's see what's going on here. So this one, again, patients at rest. The action was several movements of the needle into different depths and quadrants. The gain was 50 microvolts, so this is smaller, and the sweep is 10. So let's take a look at what we see going on. Let me make sure the volume is all the way up. Okay, so this is, again, let's see what's going on here. Okay. So you saw that. So this is at rest. So we're looking at different insertions of the needle. So every time the needle gets inserted, what happened was we saw a new kind of train of potentials going across the screen, and it lasted for a little bit. So what would you classify those waveforms as being?
Well, I mean, thought process I had still was, I mean, the insertional didn't look bad, but I just thought we were seeing some fibs and sharps coming in the
Exactly.
process.
Right. We saw some fibs and positive sharper. So we saw that brief discharge of insertional activity, but then after the needle stopped moving, we still saw some potentials going across the screen. So those
Mm-hmm.
potentials, those were fibs and positive sharp waves. So that's exactly what we saw when we had abnormal spontaneous potentials. I won't play the whole thing again, but I'll just play a little bit. And we see there's some potentials going across, but now the needle will move. There it goes. And that brings about a new batch of insertion activity. Spontaneous potentials. So there, and it's sustained, meaning it keeps going. So the needle just moved, and now we just saw another brief discharge, and now we see some positive sharp waves there. The needle's moving. You see how erratic the baseline is. The needle moved, and now we get another causation of, again, a sustained potentials going across the screen. Now those are a little bit more severe. Those are, those taking up a little bit more of the screen. And what we see here is the rate. The rate is another thing to note on. You see how the rate is, each one is firing at a regular rate, but there's many different ones on the screen that are all firing at different rates. So for example, motor units, when the motor unit fires, it stays at a steady rate. Then another one comes in and that stays at a steady rate. So they're all going about the same rate. But the fibs and positive sharp waves, each individual one fires at a regular rate, but the two of them on the screen are firing at different rates. So what I term that is, I turn that on as here as regularly irregular. So I made up that word and term. Fibs and positive sharp waves are regularly irregular, meaning that as a whole, it's irregular, but each individual one is firing regularly. So as opposed to motor units, where motor units, each one fires at its kind of similar or close to rate as the other ones, the fibs and positive sharp waves, one could be at a rate of, let's say, 5, while the next one could be at a rate of 50. So they're all over the place.
Right.
The other way to distinguish it is, again, the sound is another key factor. This isn't my term. This is seen, and Dr. Brooks may have mentioned this, or McKibben as well. Rain on a tin roof. It sounds very erratic, kind of like randomly, not in an overall pattern. It's just kind of falling haphazardly. So it sounds like rain on a tin roof. So those are two of the ways that you can help to distinguish if the person is having difficulty relaxing, which often happens because you got a needle sticking in them. They're in pain enough because of their condition, and then you go and you put a needle in a potentially painful area, and they may kind of start to guard, a muscle guard, or trigger a little bit. So you may see some motor units. Motor units, again, will fire at a steady, sustained rate, while fibs and positive sharp waves, overall, they'll be a little bit more erratic and irregular as a whole. So that's how, that's one of the key differentiators between fibs and positive sharp waves and motor units, is that the fibs, and besides being only occurring at rest, is that the fibs and positive sharp waves are going at a different rate than a normal motor unit would appear. So just to review again, these only occur at rest, and they indicate denervation of muscle fibers. So they both mean the same thing. Even though they look different, they mean basically the same thing. In an acute injury or an acute denervation, they'll be on the larger side, so anywhere from 100 to 1,000 microvolts. While as it gets more chronic, they'll get a lot smaller. They'll be about 50 microvolts. So they get much smaller as the denervation persists, because they get the active cellular process starts to degrade, and you lose that excitability of that muscle tissue. They're graded 1+ to 4+ based on quantity, and that's kind of a little bit subjective. You got to kind of just play around with it. 4+ is easy. They're all over the place in the screen. 1+ is kind of one here and there, and then the rest of them go, kind of in between. And they always signify axon damage. So fibs and positive sharp waves, there's very few always in all areas of medical practice or whatever, or PT practice. This is one exception where fibs and positive sharp waves always mean axonal damage. So they always mean that there's a problem with the axon. So that's the fibs and positive sharp waves. Any questions on that so far?
Nope, it's good.
Okay. All right. So now what's happening here? So this is going to be with a gentle contraction. So we have a gentle isometric contraction, a gain of 200, a sweep of 10, and this is a monopolar needle. So let's take a look at what we see here. So first question, how many different mode, so these are mode units, obviously. So how many different mode units did we see here?
Well, initially it was one.
Right.
Because you only had one on the screen.
Right.
And then it did become two, because they were too close together.
Right.
To the same one.
Okay. And how would you describe those motor units?
And say I have to look at it again here.
I'll play it again.
Yeah, play it again here. We had normal size.
Mm-hmm.
It looks to me like,
Let me see if I can put. Let me wind it a little bit. I'll see if I can free screen. Oops.
Yeah, let's say just counting. I mean, you look like they're fairly normal, as far as height.
Right, they're normal size, right? For a gentle isometric contraction, they're normal size.
And as far as the number of, they're basically, I mean, from what I can see, it looks like a fairly normal. But I would say you've got more. They're not from the same area, obviously.
They're different. They're different motor units.
Right.
This one, with the way I stopped it here, it looks pretty normal.
Yeah.
But one on the left, but this one, it's normal size, but look at how many times it crosses the baseline. Okay. So we have starting from here, we'll go down, we cross up, that's 1.
Right.
Cross 2, 3, 4, 5, plus 1 is 6.
6. So we should be up no more than 5.
No more than 5 is anything more than 5 is polyphasic.
Yeah, so we are polyphasic on that one.
Right. So this one is polyphasic. So and I'll play it one more time. And these are they're both polyphasic, and you can also, it sounds a tiny bit different. Think of like this is an outdated analogy, but like spokes in a baseball card. Card and spokes of a bicycle tire. You have to
you're talking my age, so I understand.
Okay, no problem. Some of my students, they don't know what the hell I'm talking about. They like
I used to put baseball cards or playing cards, so yes.
Yeah. So like if you have one card, it'll go and it'll just pop, 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 pop. But when you have two cards placed together, you'll hear them kind of, if they're like a little bit separated, you'll hear like two pops going across, and that's
Yeah.
kind of where it's kind of like a double pop almost. So let's just play it one more time and just listen subtly different. And now I got to start again. You hear how it's like a duller kind of like more spread out popping type of sound.
Yeah.
And now that second one comes in, and it's also kind of, and it stopped, but it also kind of popped out a little bit as well, where you hear a little bit more than just one single pop, 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 pop.
Right.
So these are both. Well, the other one of them definitely is. But so this is an example of a polyphasic motor unit. Again, because we see here. Let's see if I can play it one more time, and see if I can stop it. There we go. That's a good shot there. You see
Yeah.
how many times it crosses up and down on the bass
Oh,
line.
yeah.
So that this is a classic textbook example of a polyphasic motor unit, of how many times it crosses up and down from the bass line. So this was an example of a classic. It's normal size, but it's a polyphasic motor unit potential.
Right.
So what is polyphasic is when a single waveform crosses the bass line more than 5 times. And it's seen best with a very gentle isometric contraction. The reason why you need a very gentle contraction is because if the person's contracting too hard, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think would happen if the person contracts with more force?
Well, I mean, obviously you're going to be recruiting a whole lot more muscle, and it's going to be hard to
Exactly.
tell what the waveforms are.
Exactly. If you contract too hard, then you'll have too many motor units, and you can't differentiate between when one ends and when the other begins. So you can't really tell, separate them. So you really need to, as best as the person can do, try to get them to do a very minimal contraction as possible. And it sounds different from a normal motor unit because, again, it sounds like it's almost double, like 2 cards in the spokes as opposed to 1 card in the spoke, where it sounds like a double kind of sound than a single popping sound. However, polyphasics are not always abnormal. You can have a certain percentage of motor units within one muscle being polyphasic, and that's okay. The magic number, and again, this may vary a little bit depending on what reference you use, but generally about like 33, 40%. If you're seeing a bunch of motor units in a muscle, that's why we look at not just one motor unit in a muscle, but we look at about, the suggested guideline is like 12 different motor units at least, to look at about 12 different motor units. And if more than 30% of them are polyphasic, then that muscle as a whole is abnormal. Because we're not looking at, when we're looking at motor unit analysis, we're looking at not just one thing, we're looking at the global picture of the muscle. Whereas opposed to fibs and positive sharp waves, there we look at individual axons, but in motor unit analysis, we're looking at the entire muscle. So that's why we need to see about 12 or 20 different motor units and look at, and if more than 30% of them are polyphasic, then that entire muscle is abnormal. So the rule for polyphasics is that if you see more than 30% of them within a given muscle, that always indicates reinnervation. So that indicates that the muscle is trying to heal itself. So that is a sign of a chronic injury. And that's important to differentiate it. Say if a person had, surgery in their past, or if they had an old injury and now they re-aggravated it, which is it just a re-aggravation or is it something new? So it's important to be able to see the polyphasics because that tells us the chronicity of the injury. And one thing I've noticed with the Cadwell, I use the Cadwell too. One thing I've noticed with the Cadwell is the multi-motor unit analysis function it's good, but just like any device, you have to be smarter than the machine. So the computer will oftentimes, when it's trying to pick out different motor units, it may put the markers in the wrong location. So, for example, it'll look at the picture and it will mark two motor units as being one. So it'll see two motor units close together, and you can tell they're separate because they have a space in between. And you'll see them to actually be two different ones, but the computer will think that it's one, and it'll mark that as polyphasic.
Now, is that with the summits?
That's all Cadwells. Yeah, all the
Oh,
Cadwell.
yeah, well, okay.
Yeah,
I guess
it's not
I haven't seen that.
something.
I've got the old wave.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, see, I've got the old wave, so I don't know. I haven't seen it yet on mine, so.
Yeah, it's on both models. That both models have that function, and but it's a good function. But just like anything, you always got to be smarter than the device. You know,
Correct.
you got to be able to take what the device gives you, but then use your clinical training and your clinical judgment to determine what's going on. So you just gotta. It's a great feature, but you gotta double check it to make sure that it's right. And just don't just go by what the machine tells you. So you gotta be the machine is really good. I use a Cadwell all the time. But you got to be able to recognize if the computer makes a mistake. It doesn't make it all the time, but once in a while it does. So you just got to be aware of that.
Got it.
And then why does it look like that? And this is a busy slide, but the reason why it looks polyphasic is because normally in a normal motor unit, you remember it's one axon plus all the muscle fibers that axon that one axon innervates. And on a normal conditions, all those muscle fibers will fire or depolarize at the same time because they're all coming from the same axon. So if you look at the top picture here, we see that this axon had 4 muscle fibers connected to it, and when that axon depolarized, it activated all those 4 muscle fibers at the same time, which gives you the shape of that waveform, the height of that waveform. But then when we come in here, when this motor unit, when this axon takes on these 2 muscle fibers that were previously connected to a dying axon, it's got to grow connections. It's got to grow sprouts, and this is called collateral sprouting. That's a little bit more advanced, but this is what it's called, is collateral sprouting, where the axon, the healthy axon, is sending off branches that will resupply the dying muscle fibers. So the reason why it's polyphasic is because now this myelin is immature. It's growing at a different rate than this myelin is. So all 6 of these, now 6 axons, 6 motor muscle fibers are now firing at different times. So they're firing at different times. So here's the original 4. Here is this one here. Here is that one here. So instead of all firing at the same time, they fire at different times. So these 4 fire at once, but then this one fires here, that one fires there. So we get a polyphasic, meaning they're all discharging at different times. And it's a long duration because now we can see from when the entire motor unit discharges, it starts here and ends here. So because we're serrated, and as far as how they fire, we get a longer duration as well. So that's kind of a little bit about the physiology of why the polyphasic waveforms look like that, is because the myelin growing around them is immature, so it looks polyphasic. It looks like it's many phases. So that's the explanation of why they look polyphasic.
I got
you. So let's look at this one now. So let's look at this one. And again, this was a person starting at rest, going to a gentle contraction, and then going to a stronger contraction. So this is, they went through the full gamut of rest to minimal contraction to maximal contraction. And this one, the gain is 500 microvolts, so it's pretty big gain, and the sweep is 10 milliseconds. So let's look at and see what happens here. Okay. So what was the first thing that you noticed about the first few motor units that came on the screen? So let's just play it again, start. Let's see if I can catch the first one. Oops, I'm sorry, I went to the next slide. This is the same slide. Well, there's the answer. Why does it keep doing that? I don't want it to stop. I want it to stop the recording.
Mhm.
No, I don't know why it's not. Let me stop it.
Okay.
Let's see if I try one more time. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there we go. So now, so this is one of the first motor units. So we see so this is the person just initially contracted, and we see that the gain is 500. So this is the size of this. This is 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 4,000 microvolts. So
Right.
that's the first motor unit that popped up is 4,000 microvolts. So again, that's still within the normal range. Normal was 300 to 8,000.
Right.
So it's within the normal range. However, it's the first one that comes up. So again, the first one that comes up should be small because you're trying to contract the muscle very slightly, and you should activate the smallest muscle fibers. So this is abnormally large for the level of output that the person demonstrated. So let's see if it continue playing. And as the person, see now they're going to start to contract a little harder. And what you notice is that that same motor unit is the only one that's on the screen. It's the only one that's discernible on the screen. And you see it going from once or twice to like 5 or 6 at the same on the screen at the same time. So that would be reduced or neuropathic recruitment. It's reduced because as the person contracted harder, there was less motor units available for them to recruit. So it's kind of like a misnomer. You think of reduced meaning that you see it less of it. It's less of a total number of motor units, but the motor units that are there fire faster because there's no other ones left. So in reduced recruitment, you have a reduced overall number of motor units that are firing, but the ones that do fire very quickly. And they fire, you can tell they fire very quickly by that they appear on the screen more than 2 at a time of the same exact shape. So again, a neuropathic recruitment is when the overall number of motor units is recruited when the muscle works harder is less. So there's a less number of motor units being recruited. The reason, because this is a neuropathy, meaning that there's less healthy axons available. So when the person tries to contract, they don't have as much motor units, so there's less there's less stuff to contract. Generally, the smaller motor units are the ones that are destroyed first. You know, the law of the jungle, the strongest, the large survive. Well, same as in the nerves. In this instance, we saw that there was no small motor units. The first one was 4,000, so that's pretty big. So we saw that the smaller ones weren't there. So as soon as they tried to do even a minimal contraction, you saw a very large potential on the screen. And the remaining motor units fire at a faster rate. So they have less of them. So in order for the person to still do the same motion, to still do the same contraction, the remaining ones will fire faster. So you'll see 2 or 3 or 4 or more of the same shape on the screen at one time. So that's the other classic hallmark of a neuropathic recruitment, is that there's overall less number of motor units available. These are typically seen in axon injury, but not always. Here's one of the exceptions. These can be seen in a conduction block, and a conduction block is basically a severe myelin injury. So it's a severe myelin injury because there's no way for the person to recruit more muscle fibers. So they're trying to recruit, but something is blocking it. So this is one of the times where EMG can kind of indirectly give you some information about the myelin health of it. And it's not something I would put my house on, but it gives you a little inkling about the myelin function, because it can show reduced myelin. It's more often than not a sign of axon damage, but in some severe cases of severe myelin injury, you can see reduced recruitment. The key thing I wanted to stress, the last key thing, is that you have to differentiate reduced recruitment versus because of nerve damage versus reduced recruitment because of pain. So what do you think will happen if the person is in pain, either from pain from their condition or pain from their muscle, pain from the needle and sticking in the muscle? So what do you think would happen if the person tries to contract harder if they're in pain? What do you think would you see on the screen?
Well, let's say if they're trying to, you would see, of course, a lot of units that would pop up. I think, I mean, as far as I could see that you're trying to get them to relax, they're not relaxing, so you're not going to see necessarily the small units that you want to, because they're tightening up too much.
Right.
So,
So yes. So if the person's in pain, that's right. You'd see, or if they're in pain, or if they don't want to contract, or so if they don't want to contract the muscle because they're in pain, what you'll see an overall less number of motor units, because the person's in pain, they don't want to contract the muscle. So if they don't want to contract the muscle, you'll see an overall less number of units. That's not reduced recruitment, because in true reduced recruitment, you'd see a reduced number of units, but the ones that are there are going to be firing faster. So that's how you can differentiate between recruitment, reduced recruitment by pain, which is normal, versus reduced recruitment because of nerve damage, which is abnormal. So in reduced recruitment by pain, caused by pain, which is not really it's not something we quantify or comment on, but if the person is in pain, the motor units that they have are not going to speed up. They're just going to keep firing at the same rate.
okay.
Where if it's reduced recruitment because of neuropathy, the motor units that they have are going to fire faster. So that's the key thing, that the remaining ones are going to fire faster. So that's like a subtle trick to kind of pick up, because they both look there's less of them, but in neuropathic recruitment there's less of them, but the ones that are there are firing faster. So that's how you can kind of differentiate between the two of those.
Okay.
So let's look at again and take a look at some final different types of waveforms. So this is the person is at rest, the gain is at 100, and the sweep is at 10. So let's see what you see in this tracing. Okay, so what did you see there?
Okay, we had insertional activity, and then we saw some fibs and some sharps.
Almost. There was definitely insertional activity, but it wasn't. The fibs and positive sharp rays weren't sustained. They started, but then they didn't continue. Remember, if you
Okay, that's
recall,
correct. That
the
has to
fibs
be
and positive
sustained.
sharp rays, they have to be sustained. So this would be increased insertional activity. So this would
Okay.
be the needle moved, and we saw some potentials going across the screen, but they didn't stay remaining. They kind of died off a little bit.
Okay. So
This
this would
would
be
be
normal.
this is no abnormal. This is abnormal.
Oh,
This is abnormal. This is increased insertional activity, and
okay.
increased insertional activity is kind of a precursor to fibs and positive sharp waves.
Makes sense.
So it's kind of like there's axon damage coming down the road. So this is an example of an abnormally increased insertional activity. So I'll play it one more time so we can see it again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there, and it looks like it keeps going, but then it just dies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it starts again, and goes a little bit, but it didn't continue.
Gotcha.
So this will be an abnormal increase in insertion activity. So this will be abnormal.
Okay.
So let's look at this again. So now we have a gentle contraction with a gain of 1,000. So this is a really big, and a sweep of 10. So we have a gentle contraction, a gain of 1,000, and a sweep of 10. So that was only a short clip, but with a gentle contraction, what do you think is going on there?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we're basically dealing with the polyphasic.
Almost.
Almost.
That could be there, but there's one other differentiating factor in this, and there's two things. If you look at the excuse me, the level of contraction and the gain.
True. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4,500. 4,500. Or 4,500.
Right. So it's a
Right.
gentle contraction, and we're
Right,
getting a
so-
unit of 4,500.
Yeah.
So
So again,
abnormal.
we have abnormal with. So we're suspecting again that we're not recruiting as before because we're getting big fibers first, and there's got to be some damage.
Right. So this is another sign of a chronic injury, because we have no small motor units. We only have large ones.
Right.
So the amplitude is increased. So we have an abnormal EMG. We have abnormally large motor unit potentials.
Got it.
That indicates chronic damage.
Right.
Okay, I think there's one more. Actually, no, two more. So let's take a look at this. This is at rest with a gain of 100 and a sweep of 10. So let's take a look at that here. So what do you think you saw on that one?
I don't know. Well, we're seeing increased insertional activity.
Right.
But again, from what I'm seeing, it's not lasting. It's dying out. So it's not maintaining to be fibs and positive spike waves.
Right. It's kind of similar to the previous one. Right. Where we saw
Right.
some We saw the increase in insertional activity. This one lasted a little bit longer than the other ones did. So you can kind of call it either way. I mean, it didn't truly last all the way, but it did last a little bit longer than the previous one did. So you could kind of argue that this, and this is where EMG gets a little bit subjective. You can kind of argue between, is it just increased insertional activity, or is it like 1 plus fibs and positive sharp waves?
Okay. Yeah, like I
But
say,
they both kind of mean very similar.
yeah. I get what you're saying. Like I said, I've looked at some that are, they just continue with Rick, and they just, stay and stay and stay. So that's, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so this wasn't like perfect textbook, but it was pretty close to, excuse me, pretty close to being sustainable.
Okay.
And then this is the last one. So let's take a look at this here. So this is gentle contraction, 500 sweep 10. So let's take a look at this one here. Try to listen to the sound.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like polyphasics from what we heard before.
Right. It sounds very similar. These are polyphasic. Not all of them are, but there's a good percentage of them.
Right.
See if I can pause it at the right moment.
Yeah, you definitely, this one compared to the other one seems even more muddled with a mixture, than the first one.
Yeah, because this one has a few of them on this, like this one over here is normal on the far right side of the screen, but this one all the way on the left, you can see how many times it crosses the baseline. And if I can try to pause it again after it rolls a little bit. Let's see if I can get another one. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
There's another, there's one motor unit there, but you see this motor unit is crossing the baseline many times. So you see there's quite a few polyphasics on the same trace. So you can see how it sounded a lot different than the standard, even the single motor unit from the large single motor unit from before. So you look at it, but you also, the hearing is something that you practice and pick up on as well.
Right.
Let's see, look at this one. This is a gentle to a stronger contraction of gain of 500, sweep of 10. So what do you think? I'm still going.
I mean, if I had to say again, I think we're also looking at something that we've got chronic damage here, because again, it seems like we're getting a lot of the same motor unit.
Right. Yeah. This is very similar to what we see before. The shape, the size is not that big compared to the other one. Only about maybe 2,000, 2,500. But there's only one. It's the only one that it keeps going over and over again. So this would be the neuropathic or reduced recruitment, because the person went from a and it's important that you realize that it goes from a gentle to a stronger contraction, because the person contracted harder, but there was no more motor units that came available. So it was, you see how the less motor units available were there. So
Right.
so there was only the one. So this was a neuropathic type of recruitment. And then finally, this one's the last one. We have gentle to strong to max contraction with a gain of 500 and a sweep of 20. So let's take a look at this one here. So what do you think you saw there?
I mean, first of all, we're sitting at 500 and we're at 20, so we're seeing twice the screen.
Right.
I mean, from what I saw, I mean, I was looking at seeing more normal as we build up to maximum contraction. I didn't really see anything, but then, for me, I'm not used to looking at 20, so
Right.
yeah. But I just saw increased recruitment and more fibers firing.
Exactly, and that you got it right on the head. This was a normal recruitment. I threw this in here just to kind of throw a little bit off, but you got it. That's very good. This is a normal muscle. So this is a normal recruitment because you saw very few motor units popping up, and then as the person contracted harder, they got a little bit bigger, and they got more of them as they continued to contract harder. You saw more and more and more to where eventually, not quite, but pretty close to where the baseline was totally obscured by all the different motor units.
Right.
So this would be normal interference pattern, because this is what you'd expect to see if the person contracts the muscle as hard as they can. So again, it's very hard to get full interference, even on some, and the normals, by the way, on all these recordings, all the normals I recorded myself. So it's hard even for a non-impaired person to get full recruitment of certain muscles, because the muscle fibers, if the muscle is very big, it's hard to get, and the muscle fibers are spaced out. It's hard to get them all to fire at the same time. So it's it's very hard to get full recruitment. That's why full interference. That's why interference pattern is kind of a very subjective type of finding, where on its own it doesn't really stand out that much. So you see how hard it is to get full interference on a muscle, because the muscle fibers, especially on a larger muscle, they're so spread apart that it's hard to get all of them to fire. So this was an example of a normal muscle recruitment, going from a small contraction to a larger to a maximal contraction.
Okay.
So that was very good. So that was a normal recruitment, normal experience. So any kind of questions? That was kind of the different. I showed a few normals, a few abnormals, and like the key things are trying to look for the highlights of the different things and what differentiates a normal versus an abnormal, and try to kind of pick in on those things and be on the radar for those. So any kind of questions on general principles of looking at motor units or spontaneous potentials or recruitment?
I think I've got a pretty good idea of what you got, but my question might be to you is, okay, so you do a testing. What do you attempt to highlight on a test when you take, pictures of the units? What would you typically do on a test, or what things do you think are important? Even say, for example, if you have a fairly normal or normal EMG.
if I have a normal EMG, to be honest, I don't really take any snapshots,
Okay.
because if it's normal, it's normal.
Okay.
So uh, um, so with a normal EMG, really, I can't remember the last time I took a snapshot
Okay.
of a normal EMG tracing.
Okay.
Um, as far as abnormals, even abnormal snapshots, they can
Uh-huh.
be a little misleading too, because you need to put them into context as to what's going on at that moment of contraction. So, say for example, let's say I asked the person to contract hard. Let's say, to do a forceful
Hmm.
contraction, and I
Right.
see large motor units,
Hmm.
and I stored that.
Right.
Now, somebody just looking at that picture will see motor units like 3,000 and above and say, "Oh, that's abnormally large," but based in context, the person was contracting hard, so I
Mhm.
should see large motor units.
Right.
So the so um, you know or same thing like looking at fibs and positive sharp waves and insertional activity. So if you take a snapshot at the exact second of when you do your insertional activity, it's going to look like a whole big mess of fibs and positive sharp waves.
Okay.
So if you're um, you need to if you want to take a snapshot of something, it has to be kind of like clear cut textbook. This is no doubt about it. This is what it is, and you can maybe put a comment on the snapshot saying this was recorded with minimal contraction, or this was recorded with maximal contraction, or this was recorded at multiple depths with no needle movement. Because just taking and even on these video clips, that's why I put in, the specific parameters of what was going on with gentle contraction, with maximal contraction, so on and so forth, because you need to understand what the person was doing in order to put that EMG potential into context. Because if I just showed you video clips, you could, without saying what it is, you could make up a bunch of different conclusions. So that's why the EMG snapshot pictures that you put on the report, why they may be helpful, they're really just kind of um, secondary to what you put in the data table. Because what the data table is like the summary of what you exactly saw. So it's a little bit more descriptive of what the live event than a instantaneous snapshot is.
Okay.
So that kind of went around the bush a little bit, but it's the individual snapshot doesn't hold as much weight as like a snapshot of an NCV tracing, where you can see all the onset markers in the wrong place, or
Right.
there's too much noise on the baseline or something like that. But
Hmm.
with EMG waveforms, because you have to put into context of how hard or light the person is contracting or trying to rest, you can't really. It's less stuff to put behind it as opposed to the NCV waveforms.
Okay. That's helpful.
So any other kind of questions, or I apologize again for the delay in starting.
All right. It was worth it, John. I appreciate it. I tell you, uh, like you said, you've got to put things in context,
Right.
and you gave me a lot more context to think about
Hmm.
when we're doing. So that was helpful because, like I said, I'm still very new in
Right.
this process,
Hmm.
and you start out and you don't even know the questions to ask.
Right. Hmm.
So
Yeah,
this
and
has
it's
been helpful.
good, good, good. Glad it was. And again, it's just like any skill, like whether it be driving a car, riding a bike, or managing four patients at a time, or doing passive range of motion, or taking a blood pressure, whatever.
Oh
Just
yeah.
the more you do it, the better you get at it. If you understand, the basic concepts, and PTs are really good with anatomy. They're really good with muscle activation and things like that. And if you understand the basic concepts, then it's just kind of doing it over and over again and seeing similar things and being confident in what you're seeing. And there's always going to be things you're going to be, what's that? I never seen that before. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I see some once in a while. I see something I never seen before.
Right.
But you learn from it, and you just keep building upon your knowledge base, and just keep practicing and keep going at it.
Right. Well, good deal. Good deal. Well, I appreciate it, and
No
look
problem.
forward to more that you provide. I think that, like I said, you just got to keep searching. You got to keep going at it, and that's what I work with my staff too. It's like, like you said, you see something and you've been practicing for a long time, and you're going, wow,
Mhm.
that's something I haven't seen, because I've been practicing 37 years.
Yeah. Hmm.
And it was like I saw something not too long ago. I said, it's been 37 years and I haven't had that particular problem,
Right.
even though I
Mhm.
see a lot,
Yeah. Hmm. Yep. The textbook isn't finished being written yet. It's still there's still more chapters to add.
Absolutely.
Yep. All right. Cool. All right. So if you have any questions, you got my email address. If you ever come across something, feel free to
Absolutely.
give me a question or whatever, and happy to help you out on your journey.
Well, I appreciate that because, like I said, we've got a ways to go. I've got at least 500 before I can do what you're doing and have that ECS. So
Yeah.
it'll be a little while.
Yeah. No, just keep at it and just keep doing, and get there. Everybody, you'll get there eventually.
Yep. Sounds great.
All right. Cool.
All right.
All right. Take it easy.
Hey, you too.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.